They toasted to family like it was sacred until my mother pointed at me and called me a freeloader in front of 60 guests. My stepfather shoved my gift back and said they did not need charity. I just smiled and set the box on the table. Under the silver key lay a truth they had buried for 13 years. Once, I opened that lid. Their anniversary stopped being a party and turned into a public reckoning. My name is Taylor Evans, and walking into the Sonoran Ridge Country Club felt less like entering a party and more like stepping onto a witness stand where the verdict had been delivered 13 years ago. The Arizona heat was oppressive outside, shimmering off the asphalt, but inside, the air conditioning was set to a chill that matched the reception I knew was waiting for me. I adjusted the weight of the box in my hands. It was wrapped in heavy navy blue paper and tied with a real silver satin ribbon. It looked elegant. It looked expensive. It looked like an olive branch. It was actually a landmine. I moved through the lobby, my heels clicking a steady, confident rhythm against the polished marble floors. I kept my chin high, ignoring the instinct to shrink that had been drilled into me during my teenage years. I was 29 years old now. I ran my own studio. I paid my own taxes. But in this room, none of that mattered. To the people inside the grand ballroom, I was simply the mistake Marissa Klein had made before she married well. The double doors were open, spilling light and the murmur of polite society into the hallway. I paused, just at the threshold. The room was packed with at least 60 people. I saw faces I recognized from the society pages and neighbors from the gated community of Juniper Heights who used to look the other way when I mowed the lawn, while their kids played in the pool. "Is that her daughter?" A woman in a beige sequined dress whispered, not nearly as quietly as she thought. "I thought she was estranged," her companion replied, hiding a smirk behind a champagne flute. "She looks different." I stepped fully into the room. Marissa was standing near the center, bathed in the warm glow of the crystal chandelier. She looked like a queen holding court. She wore a silver gown that probably cost more than my first car, her hair coiffed into a perfect, immobile helmet of blonde. She was laughing at something a man in a tuxedo said, her head thrown back, her hand resting possessively on Victor's arm. Then she saw me. The laughter didn't stop, but her eyes went dead. It was a look I knew well. It was the same look one gives a waiter who has dropped a fork. Mild irritation mixed with a debo for the nuisance to simply vanish. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just tightened her grip on Victor's sleeve and turned her shoulder slightly, physically blocking me out of her frame. Victor Klein tapped his glass with a spoon. The sharp, clear ringing cut through the chatter, bringing the room to a hush. He stood tall, projecting the image of the benevolent patriarch, the self-made man who had pulled himself up by his bootstraps, conveniently forgetting the inheritance that had bought his first boots. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate 20 years of building a life together," Victor boomed, his voice practiced and smooth. "Marissa and I have built everything we have on 3 pillars: hard work, responsibility, and self-reliance. We believe that you only appreciate what you earn." His eyes scanned the crowd, soaking in the nodding heads, before landing squarely on me. The warmth drained from his face. It was a calculated glare, meant to use me as a prop for his sermon. Sadly, not everyone understands that value, he added, his tone dropping an octave. Some people think the world owes them a living. A few heads turned my way. I felt the heat rise in my neck, but I didn't flinch. I kept walking toward the main table, the box heavy in my arms. Lost again. Taylor? The voice came from my right. Bryce Klein blocked my path near the open bar. At 33. My stepbrother still had the face of a prep school bully, softened only slightly by expensive scotch and a tailored suit. He leaned against the marble counter, swirling his drink. "Hello, Bryce," I said, my voice steady. "Did you come to ask for rent money, or are you just here to beg for sympathy?" He looked me up and down, his lip curling. He gestured to the navy box in my hands with his glass. "What's that? Something from the clearance aisle? I hope you didn't spend your grocery budget on it." "It is a gift," I said, stepping around him. "For the anniversary." "We don't need your charity," he sneered to my back, low enough that only I could hear. "And we definitely don't need you depressing the atmosphere." I reached the main table just as Marissa decided to acknowledge my existence. She didn't hug me. She didn't even step forward. She simply gestured at me with a limp hand, as if presenting a mildly interesting, slightly broken antique. "Everyone, this is Taylor," Marissa announced, and her voice was light, airy, stripping me of my dignity with surgical precision. "She decided to surprise us. You know how Taylor is. She has always had a little trouble finding her own way. It is so hard for young people to be independent these days, isn't it?" The condescension was thick enough to choke on. She was painting the picture she had been painting for a decade. Taylor, the burden. Taylor, the failure. Victor stepped up beside her, wrapping a protective arm around his wife. He looked at the guests, then at me, then pointedly at the gift box. "We appreciate the gesture," Victor said, his voice booming so the entire back of the room could hear. "But let's be clear, we don't fund freeloaders here. If you think a wrapped box buys you a loan, you are mistaken." The laughter started as a ripple and spread like a wave. It wasn't raucous. It was the polite, cruel tittering of people who were relieved they weren't the target. Bryce was snickering openly by the bar. Marissa offered a tight, pitying smile, as if apologizing to her guests for my rudeness. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. The old Taylor, the 16-year-old girl who had begged for a winter coat, might have run out the door, but that girl was gone. I walked up to the pristine white tablecloth. It was littered with expensive gifts, crystal vases, silver platters, envelopes thick with tea. I set my navy blue box down right in the center. It made a solid, heavy thud that silenced the immediate area. I looked up, meeting Marissa's eyes. For the first time in my life, I didn't look for approval. I looked for a target. "Before I leave," I said, my voice clear, projecting without shouting, "can I ask one question?" Victor rolled his eyes. "Make it quick. Taylor, we have a schedule." I ignored him. I locked eyes with my mother. Why does a document with my signature exist from the year I was 17? The air left the immediate vicinity of the table. Marissa's pitying smile froze. It didn't drop. It just calcified, turning into a rictus of panic. Victor's hand, which had been resting on her shoulder, went rigid. The tittering in the room died instantly. "I don't know what you are talking about," Marissa stammered, her voice suddenly brittle. "You are making a scene." "Am I?" I asked. I reached out and rested my fingertips on the silver ribbon of the box. I saw Victor take a half-step forward, his face flushing a dangerous shade of red. Realizing that whatever was in the box was not a toaster or a picture frame, I paused, my finger hooked through the loop of the bow. "If you want to know what is inside," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the silent room like a gunshot, "you need to know what you took first." The room blurred. The smell of expensive perfume and prime rib faded, replaced by the scent of dust, packing tape, and grief. I wasn't 29 anymore. I was 16, and my world was ending. 13 years ago. The silence in our house was louder than any scream. I was 16 years old, standing in the hallway of a home that suddenly felt too big, staring at a pair of work boots by the door that would never move again. My father, Sean Evans, had been a safety engineer. He spent his life calculating risks, inspecting beams, and ensuring that other people came home to their families. The irony that he died in a chaotic, senseless traffic accident on a wet highway 3 hours from home was a joke I did not find funny. The funeral was a blur of black fabric and casseroles, but one image burned itself into my retinas. My mother. Marissa stood by the casket, clutching a handkerchief she never actually used to wipe her eyes. Because her makeup remained flawless for 4 hours straight, she accepted condolences with the grace of a widow in a movie, nodding at the right times, sighing at the right intervals. People whispered about how strong she was. They admired her composure. I stood beside her, feeling like my chest had been hollowed out with a spoon, assuming that her performance was just armor. I thought she was holding it together for us. I thought we were a team, 2 survivors clinging to the wreckage. I was wrong. We were not a team. I was the wreckage, and she was the salvage crew. 10 days after the funeral, I came home from school to find the hallway strange. It took me a moment to realize why. The boots were gone. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I ran to the coat rack. His favorite flannel jacket, the one that still smelled like sawdust and peppermint, was missing. I sprinted up the stairs, my backpack thumping against my spine, and burst into their bedroom. Marissa was there, taping up a cardboard box. The room looked sterile. The photos on the dresser were gone. His cologne was gone. The bedside table where he kept his reading glasses was bare. I asked her what she was doing. I remember my voice cracking, sounding younger than 16. She did not look up. She just smoothed the tape over the box with a sharp, rhythmic ripping sound. She told me she was decluttering. She said we needed to move forward. She said looking at his things was only going to hold us back. I begged her to stop. I asked for his watch. I asked for the silly graphic tees he wore on weekends. She stood up, brushed dust off her pants, and told me she had already donated them. She said the truck came an hour ago. It was efficient. It was brutal. It was as if Sean Evans had never existed, wiped from the earth by a donation receipt. That night, I woke up thirsty and walked down the hall. The house was dark, but a sliver of yellow light stretched out from under the kitchen door. I heard Marissa's voice. It was low, but in the empty house, it carried. She was not crying. She sounded relieved. "The settlement is coming," she said to someone on the phone. "We can finally reset." The word reset hit me like a physical blow. My father was not a person to her anymore. He was a glitch in her system, and his death was the reboot she had been waiting for. I backed away, the floorboards creaking under my feet. But she did not hear me. She was too busy laughing softly at something the person on the other end had said. In the weeks that followed, the mail became a battlefield. Thick envelopes with heavy logos from insurance companies and law firms arrived almost daily. I would see them on the counter when I got home. But by dinner time, they would vanish. When I asked about them, Marissa would wave a hand dismissively. She told me it was boring adult business. She told me not to worry my pretty little head about finances. She said she was handling everything so I could focus on school. But she was not just handling it. She was erasing it. Then came the new variable in the equation, Victor. He appeared on our doorstep barely a month after the funeral. He was too groomed, too polished, and he arrived too soon. He drove a silver sedan that looked like it cost more than our house. When he walked into our living room, the air filled with the scent of expensive, musk-heavy cologne that made me nauseous. He did not look at the photos of my father that I had managed to salvage and hide in my room. He looked at the walls. He looked at the furniture. He looked at Marissa. He looked at us, like an investor inspecting a distressed asset he was about to acquire for pennies on the dollar. Marissa introduced him as a financial consultant, a friend who was helping her navigate the complex waters of widowhood. But friends do not touch the small of your back with that kind of familiarity. Friends do not sit at the head of the table where your dead husband used to sit. I tried to call my Aunt Laurel, my father's sister. I needed to hear a voice that remembered Sean as a brother, not a paycheck. I dialed the number I knew by heart, but the line clicked and went dead. I tried my grandparents. Same result. When I asked Marissa, she sighed the sigh of a martyr. She told me she had changed our number. She said my father's family was toxic. She said they were trying to take advantage of us in our time of grief, that they only wanted money and that she had to cut them off to protect me. She painted a picture of a siege, with us inside the fortress, and my father's bloodline as the barbarians at the gate. I had no phone of my own. I had no car. I was trapped in her narrative. The climax of that wretched month happened on a Tuesday. I came home to find the kitchen table covered in paperwork. Stacks of documents, inches thick, where spread out like a fan, Marissa was sitting there, a pen in her hand. Victor was standing behind her, his hands resting on the back of her chair. He was leaning in, whispering something in her ear, pointing to a line on the bottom of a page. I stood in the doorway, invisible to them. I saw Marissa sign. She flipped the page and signed again. Flip, sign. Flip, sign. The rhythm was hypnotic and terrifying. I stepped forward and asked what she was signing. Victor turned his head. His eyes were cold, calculating chips of ice. He did not smile. He told me it was for my future. He said they were securing the estate. Marissa did not even look at me. She just kept signing, her hand moving with a desperate speed. I saw the top of one document before Victor casually placed a folder over it. It had legal jargon I did not understand at 16, but I saw my name. I saw Taylor Evans printed in bold capital letters. Why is my name on there? I asked. Marissa finally looked up. Her eyes were hard. She told me to go to my room. She said this was for the best. She said I was a child, and I did not understand the burden of debt my father had left us. That was the first lie that truly settled in my bones. My father paid for everything in cash. He drove a truck until the wheels fell off. He was not a man of debt, but I was 16. I had no power. I had no lawyer. I only had a gut feeling that screamed something was wrong. We moved 2 days later. We left the house where I learned to walk, the house where Sean Evans had built the deck with his own hands. We left it for a larger, colder house in a gated community called Juniper Heights, a place Victor chose. The night before we left, I sat on the floor of my empty room. The moonlight cut a square across the carpet. I held the only photo of my father I had managed to keep, a small 4x6 snapshot of him laughing at a barbecue, holding a spatula like a microphone. I looked at his face, fading in the dim light. I thought about the envelopes. I thought about the word reset. I thought about the way Victor looked at my mother, like she was a locked safe he had just cracked open. I whispered to the empty room. I made a promise to the ghost in the photograph. If I ever find out they lied about you, I said, if I ever find out they stole from us, I will not stay silent. I will not be the good daughter who looks away. I put the photo in my pocket. I did not know then that it would take 13 years to keep that promise. I did not know that the signature I saw Marissa scrawl on that kitchen table would be the key to everything. All I knew was that the girl who lived in this house died with her father, and the person leaving it was something else entirely, something colder, something waiting. The ink on the marriage license was barely dry before we moved to Juniper Heights. It was a sprawling, sterile suburb in Arizona, where every house was painted the same shade of aggressive beige, and the lawns were manicured to within an inch of their lives. Victor Klein's house was a monument to new money. It had high ceilings that echoed, a pool that smelled of chlorine and ambition, and a garage large enough to house a fleet of luxury cars. It also had 4 bedrooms, but apparently The math did not work out in my favor. Bryce, my new stepbrother, took the second largest room. It had an ensuite bathroom, a walk-in closet, and a balcony overlooking the golf course. He was 20 years old, a college dropout who spent his days playing video games and his nights revving the engine of the brand-new pickup truck Victor had bought him as a welcome home gift. I was given the room at the end of the hall. To call it a bedroom was a generous exaggeration. On the architectural blueprints, it was labeled as a storage space, or perhaps a sewing room. It was barely 8 feet wide. The window was a single square of glass high up on the wall, reminiscent of a prison cell, letting in a thin, dusty beam of light. There was no closet. I had to hang my clothes on a rolling rack I salvaged from the garage. When I asked Marissa why I could not have the guest room downstairs, she did not even look up from her magazine. She told me that the guest room was for guests. She said we had to be ready to entertain Victor's clients. She said I should be grateful I had a roof over my head at all. That phrase became the anthem of my 17th year. Be grateful. The atmosphere in the house was designed to make me feel like an intruder. If I sat in the living room, Victor would walk in and turn on the news without acknowledging me, turning the volume up until I left. If I made a sandwich, Bryce would lean against the counter and ask if I had paid for the ham. The tension snapped a week before the start of my senior year. I needed $300 for a lab fee and textbooks that the scholarship did not cover. I had saved some money from babysitting, but the move had eaten into my small stash. I brought the form to Marissa while she was arranging flowers in the foyer. I asked her if she could cover the difference. I promised to pay her back. Marissa sighed. A long, suffering sound. She clipped the stem of a white rose and told me that money was tight. She said the wedding and the move had drained their liquidity. She said we all had to make sacrifices. I might have believed her if a delivery truck had not pulled into the driveway 3 hours later. 2 men in uniforms unloaded a solid teak dining table with 8 matching chairs. It was magnificent and completely unnecessary. I found the invoice on the counter later. It cost $4,000. I confronted her in the kitchen. I pointed at the table and then at my school form. I asked how $4,000 for a table was a sacrifice, but $300 for my education was impossible. Victor answered for her. He walked in from the patio, smelling of cigar smoke. He did not yell. He never yelled. He simply spoke with a terrifying, calm authority. He told me to watch my tone. He said that in his house, adults earned their space. I reminded him that I was 17. I was legally a minor. I was his stepdaughter. Victor smiled, a cold flexing of facial muscles that did not reach his eyes. He said that if I wanted to be treated like a child, I should obey like one. But if I wanted to make demands about money, I needed to provide value like an adult. He called it the real world. That was the rule. I was a child when they needed to control me, and an adult when they needed to neglect me. The isolation was not just inside the house. It bled out into the neighborhood. I began to notice the way the neighbors looked at me when I walked to the bus stop. Mrs. Gable, the woman next door who spent her days pruning roses, would turn her back when I passed. One afternoon, I heard Marissa talking to her over the garden fence. I was sitting under my tiny window, trying to read Marissa's voice drifted in. She was using her tragic tone. She told Mrs. Gable that I was difficult. She said I was rebellious and ungrateful. She said I blamed Victor for trying to step up and be a father. She said I was acting out because I could not handle the structure of a good family. She was rewriting history in real time, painting me as the problem so that no one would look too closely at the solution she had engineered. But lies require paperwork, and paperwork is physical. 2 months into living there, I was looking for a roll of tape in the junk drawer of the kitchen island. The drawer was jammed. I pulled it hard, and it came off the track. I crouched down to fix it and saw a white envelope that had slipped over the back of the drawer and gotten stuck in the gap between the cabinet frame and the wall. It was not addressed to me. It was not addressed to anyone. It was a photocopy of a document. I pulled it out. It was a financial affidavit, dated 3 weeks prior. It listed assets and income for the Evans estate. I scanned the lines, not fully understanding the legal jargon, until my eyes landed on the bottom of the page. There was a signature line. Printed below it was my name, Taylor Evans, and on the line was a signature. It read, Taylor Evans. My breath hitched. It looked like my signature. It had the same loop on the Y and the same slant on the S, but it was too perfect. It lacked the slight hesitation I always had, because I was left-handed, but had been taught to write by a right-handed teacher. The pressure points were wrong. I had not signed this. I had never seen this document in my life. I walked into the living room. Marissa, Victor, and Bryce were watching television. It was a domestic scene that looked perfect from the outside. I held up the paper. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so hot it felt like ice. I asked Marissa why there was a document with my signature on it from a date when I was at school. Marissa stood up so fast she knocked over her glass of water. She marched over and snatched the paper from my hand. Her face went pale, then red. She told me not to accuse her. She said I was snooping. She said it was just a draft, a mistake from the lawyer's office that they had discarded. I looked at Victor. He did not look surprised. He looked annoyed. He told me to stop fishing for handouts. He said I was always looking for a way to play the victim. He said if I spent as much time studying as I did digging through their trash, I would not need to beg for tuition money. Bryce laughed from the sofa. He did not even turn around. He said maybe I should get a real job instead of acting like a detective. Marissa crumpled the paper into a ball and shoved it into her pocket. She told me to go to my room. She said she was disappointed in my lack of trust. I went to my room, but I did not stay there. I waited until 3 a.m. The house was silent. I crept back downstairs, avoiding the squeaky floorboard on the 3rd step. I went to the kitchen trash can. It was empty. She had taken the trash out. I went to Victor's home office. The door was locked, but it was a cheap interior lock. I used a bobby pin, a trick I had learned from a book. Not the streets. It popped open. I did not find the crumpled ball, but I found the file cabinet. It was locked. I looked around. Victor was arrogant. He left his keys in a bowl by the door. I grabbed them, unlocked the cabinet, and started flipping through files. Evans. I found a folder labeled T.E. Custody/assets. Inside, I found the original of the document I had seen. It was smoothed out. And there was more. There was a letter attached to it. I did not have time to read it all. I could hear the air conditioning unit cycle off, which meant the house was too quiet. I pulled out my prepaid flip phone. The camera was terrible, grainy and low resolution. I snapped a picture of the signature. Then I snapped a picture of the paragraph above it. I squinted at the small screen to make sure it was readable. The text was blurry, but one phrase stood out in bold. Legal font. Royalty assignment inquiry. I had no idea what a royalty was. My father was an engineer, not a musician. He did not write books. He checked bridges. I put the file back exactly as I found it. I locked the cabinet. I put the keys back in the bowl, turning them so they faced the same direction as before. I went back to my closet of a room and stared at the glowing screen of my phone. Royalty assignment. Inquiry. They were not just spending the insurance money. They were trying to redirect something else. Something I did not know existed, and they needed me to be 18 to do it fully. Or they needed to forge my consent while I was 17 to set the tracks. I looked at the tiny window. The moon was outside, free and distant. I realized then that I was not a daughter to them. I was a signatory. I was a hurdle, and hurdles were meant to be cleared. I hid the phone inside my pillowcase. I lay awake until the sun came up, listening to the silence of the house, realizing that the people sleeping down the hall were not my family. They were my adversaries, and the war had just begun. The vibration of my phone against the cheap laminate of the library desk made me jump. I was sitting in the back corner of the school library, pretending to study for a history exam, while actually calculating how many hours of minimum wage work it would take to rent a studio apartment in the worst part of town. My phone screen lit up with a number I did not recognize. It was not a local area code. It was from back home. The real home. I almost let it go to voicemail. Marissa checked my phone logs once a week, and an unexplained long-distance call was an interrogation waiting to happen. But something in my gut told me to answer. I looked around to make sure the librarian was not watching, ducked my head under the table, and pressed talk. "Hello?" I whispered. There was a pause, heavy with static and hesitation. Then, a voice I had not heard since I was a child washed over me. It was raspy, warm, and sounded exactly like my father's laugh. "Taylor," the voice said, "it is Aunt Laurel. Do not hang up." I nearly dropped the phone. Laurel was Sean's older sister. She was the one who used to sneak me candy when my mom said no. She was the one who had disappeared from my life the day after the funeral. "I thought you forgot about me," I said, my voice choking up. "I never forgot," she said, and her tone was sharp. Not at me, but at the situation. Marissa blocked every number. She returned every letter marked "Return to Sender." I had to wait until I knew you had your own phone. Listen to me. Taylor, we do not have much time. I need to see you. I told her I could not. I was grounded. I was broke. I was watched. You can, she insisted. I am at the Mesa Station Diner on 4th Street. Skip your last period. Get on a bus. I will pay for the cab back. You need to know something. Your dad did not trust Marissa with money. He planned around it. That sentence was the key that unlocked my fear. I packed my bag and walked out of the school, without a pass. The Mesa Station Diner smelled of burnt coffee and maple syrup. A scent that felt like a hug compared to the sterile lavender air freshener of the Klein house. I saw her immediately in a back booth. Laurel looked older. Her hair was grayer, and there were lines around her eyes that spoke of hard years. But she looked solid. She looked real. When she saw me, she did not hug me immediately. She looked at me, studying my face, searching for my father in my features. Then she stood up and pulled me into an embrace that smelled of rain and tobacco. It was the first time in 3 years I had been held by someone who actually loved me. We sat down. She did not order food. She reached into her large, worn leather tote bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope and a small, heavy object wrapped in a napkin. She slid them across the table. I opened the napkin first. It was a silver key, square-headed and old-fashioned. A safe deposit box key. Your father was a safety engineer, Laurel said, leaning in close. He spent his life looking for cracks in structures. He knew where things break. And he knew your mother was a stress fracture waiting to happen. I stared at the key. Before he died. Sean set up a trust. She continued. It is not millions. Taylor, we are not rich people. But he worked on a patent for a specific type of hydraulic valve clip used in commercial construction. He did not own the whole patent, but he owns a percentage of the design rights. It generates a royalty. It is small, but it is consistent. My mind flashed back to the document I had seen in Victor's office. Royalty assignment inquiry. She went on. He set it up so that the money goes into a trust for your education and your housing. It was supposed to be accessible by your guardian for your benefit until you turned 18. I told her I had never seen a dime. I told her I was sleeping in a storage room and begging for textbook money. Laurel's jaw tightened. That is because the trust has a failsafe. Sean made me the trustee, not Marissa. She can only access the funds if she submits receipts proving the money was spent on you. She tried. Taylor. Oh, she tried. She sent me invoices for that house, for her car, claiming it was for your transportation. I rejected every single one. That is why she hates us. That is why she cut us off. She could not crack the safe. So she tried to bury the key. I felt a wave of dizziness. The cruelty was not just emotional. It was financial. It was strategic. Laurel tapped the manila envelope. Read this later, she said. But listen to me now. There is a clause in the trust structure. The royalties are automatic until you are 25. But when you turn 25, The rights to the intellectual property itself come up for renewal. Only you can renew them. If you do not, they dissolve into the public domain, or, if you sign them away before then, someone else can claim the renewal rights. They are trying to get me to sign something. I whispered, "I saw a paper." Laurel nodded grimly. They want the assignment. They want to own the stream before you are old enough to understand what it is worth. They are cash poor. Taylor, Victor leverages everything. They need your dad's steady drip of money to pay the interest on their loans. She pushed the envelope closer. Inside is a copy of the trust deed and a letter. From him. I opened the clasp. My hands were trembling. I pulled out a single sheet of yellow legal paper. The handwriting was jagged and rushed, written in blue ballpoint pen. I recognized the loop of the Y immediately. It was my father's hand. Taylor. Bug. It began. I had to stop. I put a hand over my mouth to stifle a sob that tried to claw its way out of my throat. If you are reading this, it means I am not there to protect you. I am sorry. I tried to build walls around you that would hold, but I know that life has a way of knocking things down. I do not know what your mother will do when I am gone, but I know she gets scared. And when she gets scared, she thinks about money. Do not hate her for it, but do not let her drown you with her. This money is yours. It is for school. It is for a house with a window that looks out on something green. Be smart. Be safe. I love you more than there are stars in the Arizona sky. Dad. The tears finally came. They were hot and silent, dripping onto the Formica table. For years, I had thought my father left me with nothing. I thought he had left me unprepared, but he hadn't. He had been fighting for me from the grave. I went to put the letter in my backpack, but Laurel stopped me. Her hand clamped over my wrist. "No," she said firmly. I looked at her, confused. "You keep the copy," she said. "I keep the original." "Why?" I asked. Laurel's eyes were hard. Dark flint. "Because you are a minor, living in a house of wolves. If you take that original home, they will find it. They will destroy it. And if they destroy it, it is your word against theirs." She took the letter back and slid it carefully into a plastic sleeve in her bag. "You will need proof one day," she said, her voice dropping to a low, terrifying register. "And when that day comes, it will not be in a quiet room. It will be when they are backed into a corner. I will hold it until you are ready to fire the gun." I wiped my face with the rough diner napkin. I felt lighter, but also heavier. I had a weapon now. I had the truth. I have to leave. I said, "I cannot stay there anymore. You have to wait." Laurel said, "You are 17. If you run now, they will call the police. They will drag you back, and they will lock you down harder. You have to play the game. Taylor, Smile. Be the quiet. Stupid daughter they think you are. Let them think they have won. And the second the clock strikes midnight on your 18th birthday, you walk. I looked out the window at the dusty street. I realized that the coldness in my chest, the ice that had formed over the last 3 years, was not just numbness. It was armor. I stood up. I took the copy of the trust deed and folded it until it was small enough to fit inside my shoe. Under the sole. I will wait, I said. Laurel squeezed my hand one last time. It was a transfer of strength. When I walked out of the diner, the sun was blinding. I caught the bus back to Juniper Heights. I walked into the house that smelled of lies and expensive potpourri. Marissa was in the kitchen, yelling at a caterer on the phone. She looked at me with that familiar disdain, waiting for me to apologize for being alive. I just looked at her. I thought about the silver key in my pocket. I thought about the hydraulic valve my father designed, a small piece of metal holding up massive buildings. I smiled. It was a small, tight smile. Hello? Mother, I said. I went to my closet room and sat on the bed. I did not cry. I started planning. I had 1 year, 2 months, and 4 days until I turned 18. I would not spend them mourning. I would spend them sharpening my knives. The morning I turned 18, the sun had not yet risen over the terracotta roofs of Juniper Heights. The house was silent, breathing the recycled air of the central cooling system. I did not pack in a panic. I had packed 3 days ago. My life fit into exactly 2 suitcases. One held my clothes, mostly thrift store finds I had hidden from Marissa's judgmental eye. The other held my books, my laptop, and the single most important document I owned, the copy of my father's trust deed, still folded inside the sole of my sneaker. I did not make coffee. I did not take a last look at the pool, where I had never been invited to swim. I walked to the kitchen island, the vast expanse of white marble where Victor liked to lean and lecture me about gratitude. I took a yellow sticky note from the drawer and wrote a single sentence. Thanks for teaching me who I cannot rely on. I stuck it to the granite, right next to the coffee maker where Marissa would find it before her morning Pilates. Then I walked out the front door, leaving my house key on the mat. I did not look back. I took a Greyhound bus north, watching the red desert fade into the gray highways of Colorado. I ended up in Larkview, a city that sat in the shadow of the Rockies, big enough to get lost in, but small enough to afford. I found a studio apartment in a walk-up building that smelled permanently of boiled cabbage and floor wax. It was 350 square feet. The radiator clanked like a dying engine, and the view was a brick wall. I loved it. It was the first place I had ever paid for myself. Aunt Laurel came through. The trust fund was not a fortune, but it was a lifeline. Every month, a check for $1,200 arrived. In a world of trust fund kids who bought bottle service, $1,200 was nothing. But to me, it was rent. It was groceries. It was freedom. I treated that money like Holy Communion. I did not buy new clothes. I did not go to parties. I ate rice and beans and worked double shifts at a coffee shop on weeknights and a hardware supply store on weekends. I enrolled in the local university, but I did not pick a major for passion. I picked a major for warfare. I chose a dual focus: interior architecture and building compliance. I did not just want to know how to make a room look good. I wanted to know how a building stood up. I wanted to know where the pipes went, where the load-bearing walls were, and most importantly, I wanted to know the paperwork. I became obsessed with contracts, zoning laws, liability insurance, and permit requirements. While my classmates were looking at color swatches, I was memorizing the International Building Code. I learned that the world is not run by people with the loudest voices. It is run by the people who read the fine print. By my junior year, I landed an internship at Northspan Build Consulting. It was a firm that specialized in auditing construction projects for legal compliance. It was dry, boring work to most people, but to me, it was fascinating. It was a treasure hunt for lies. My mentor was a woman named Eleanor Vance, a 60-year-old structural auditor who smoked thin cigarettes and had eyes that missed nothing. One afternoon, she dropped a stack of change orders on my desk. "Find the leak," she said. I spent 6 hours going through the invoices. I found it. A contractor was double billing for drywall materials by shifting the dates on the delivery receipts. It was subtle. It was buried under 3 layers of approvals. I walked into Eleanor's office and laid the proof on her desk. She looked at it. Then she looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "You have a suspicious mind, Taylor." She said, "It is a gift. Most people look for what is there. You look for what is missing." She taught me everything. She taught me how to spot a forged lien waiver. She taught me how to trace a shell company. She taught me that if you control the paper trail, you control the narrative. I absorbed it all. I was building an arsenal, even if I did not know exactly when I would fire the first shot. In those years, I became a ghost. I deleted my old email accounts. I never created an Instagram, a Twitter, or a Facebook. When people at school asked for my handle, I told them I was old-fashioned. The truth was, I knew Marissa. I knew she would paint herself as the grieving mother of a runaway daughter to garnish sympathy points at the country club. I denied her the content. If she searched for Taylor Evans, she would find nothing but a common name and a dead end. Silence was my armor. It was in the aisle of the hardware store where I worked that I met Evan. He was not looking for a discount. He was looking for a specific type of toggle bolt for a renovation he was managing. He was tall, with hands that looked like they actually worked for a living, and he had a calmness about him that unnerved me. Men usually made me flinch. They were either loud like Victor or dismissive like Bryce. Evan Reed was neither. He asked me where the bolts were, and when I not only showed him but explained the sheer strength difference between the zinc and the steel options, he looked at me with genuine respect. We started talking. He was an architect who focused on sustainable restoration. He liked fixing broken things. Our first date was coffee in a paper cup on a park bench. I was terrified. I had spent so many years hiding who I was that I did not know how to let someone in. I told him bits and pieces. I told him I did not speak to my family. I told him I had trust issues that were structural, not just cosmetic. He did not push. He did not give me the pity look. One night, a year into our relationship, I had a panic attack. I had seen a silver sedan that looked just like Victor's parked outside my apartment. It wasn't him. But the adrenaline crash left me shaking on the kitchen floor. Evans sat down next to me. He did not try to hug me or shush me. He just sat there, solid as a concrete piling. He asked me a question that changed everything. He did not ask, "What is wrong?" or "Who hurt you?" He looked me in the eye and asked, "What do you need to feel safe?" I realized then that I did not need a rescuer. I needed a witness. I needed someone who understood that my independence wasn't a preference. It was a survival mechanism. I told him I needed to know that no one could walk through my door without my permission. The next day, he came over and installed a heavy-duty deadbolt and reinforced the strike plate on my door frame. He did not make a big deal out of it. He just made me safe. 7 years passed. I was 25 years old. I had graduated top of my class. I was working full-time at North Span. The royalties from my father's trust were set to expire or renew in 6 months. I had almost convinced myself that I had outrun them. I thought the distance between Colorado and Arizona was enough. Then came the notification. It was a Tuesday evening. I was sitting at my drafting table, working on a compliance report for a high-rise. My laptop pinged with a high-priority email alert. The subject line was vague. Urgent. Estate matter/action required. My heart hammered against my ribs. I hovered the mouse over the sender. It was a law firm I did not recognize, based in Phoenix. I clicked it open. Dear Ms. Evans, we represent the Klein Family Trust regarding the intellectual property rights currently held in the Sean Evans Testamentary Trust. We require your signature to proceed with the scheduled assignment of benefits. Please, see the attached waiver. Failure to respond will be interpreted as an abandonment of claim. I scanned down to the bottom of the email. My blood ran cold. C.C. Victor Klein. They had found me, and they weren't just asking for a signature. They were trying to trick me into signing away the renewal rights my father had warned me about. They were banking on me being young, broke, and stupid. I looked at the screen, and for the first time in 7 years, I felt the old Taylor rising up. But she wasn't the scared 16-year-old girl in the closet room anymore. She was a compliance auditor. She was a woman who knew how to read a contract better than the lawyer who wrote it. I picked up my phone and dialed Aunt Laurel. "It has started," I said. I did not delete the email. I created a new folder named Evidence and dragged it in. They wanted a signature. Fine. I would give them something. But it would not be what they were expecting. The 4 years between 25 and 29 were a blur of caffeine, blueprints, and the relentless satisfaction of proving people wrong without saying a word. I did not just climb the corporate ladder at Atlas and Pine Studio. I dismantled it and built a more efficient elevator. I was hired as a junior coordinator, but within 18 months, I was the lead project manager for their commercial division. My secret weapon was not my eye for color palettes or mid-century modern furniture. Though I had learned those things, my weapon was compliance. In an industry run by artistic egos and corner-cutting contractors, I was the person who read the zoning laws at 2 a.m. I was the one who caught a ventilation error in a high-rise retrofit that would have cost the client $2 million in fines. By the time I was 27, I had a reputation. Clients specifically requested the woman who reads the footnotes. But working for someone else meant I was still building another person's fortress. So, 2 years ago, I walked into the partner's office at Atlas and Pine and resigned. I did not leave with a dramatic speech. I left with a handshake and a client list that had already legally agreed to follow me because I had written the non-compete clauses in my own employment contract myself. And I had left a loophole wide enough to drive a truck through. Taylor Evans' studio was born in a converted warehouse space in the Arts District. I did not want it to be a massive agency. I wanted it to be a precision instrument. I hired a team of 5 people, 2 architects, 1 interior designer, and 2 paralegals. That ratio told you everything you needed to know about my business model. We did not cater to the indecisive billionaires who wanted to argue about shades of beige. We catered to investors, developers, and people who viewed real estate as a balance sheet. They loved me because I spoke their language. I spoke in terms of return on investment, liability mitigation, and occupancy permits. I learned to weaponize paperwork. When a client tried to withhold a final payment of $50,000, claiming creative differences, I did not argue. I simply forwarded him the clause in our contract regarding intellectual property rights, which stated that until full payment was rendered, I owned every design, every permit application, and every CAD file. If he didn't pay, he legally couldn't build. The check was overnighted the next morning. I was making money, real money. I bought a sleek, reliable SUV in cash. I started looking at property listings, not to rent, but to buy. But I kept my digital footprint non-existent. My website was password protected for prospective clients only. My LinkedIn profile was bare bones. To the casual observer, or a nosy mother in Arizona, I was a ghost. Marissa and Victor had no idea who I had become, if they had bothered to Google me with any real effort, or hired a private investigator worth his salt. They would have found the business filings. They would have seen that the Freeloader daughter was currently managing projects worth $40 million. But they didn't look. That was their fatal flaw. They were so convinced of their own narrative that I was helpless, broken, and destined to fail, that they never bothered to check if reality had changed. Arrogance is a blinder, and they were wearing it tight. Evan was the only one who saw the toll it took to maintain 2 identities, the successful business owner and the secret fugitive. We were living together now in a loft downtown. He had his own construction firm, and we often spent our evenings sitting on the floor with takeout, redlining each other's drawings. He never tried to fix my family situation. He knew that was a demolition job I had to handle myself. But the past has a way of knocking on the door just when you change the locks. Aunt Laurel called me on a Thursday afternoon. The tone in her voice was different. Usually, our calls were warm check-ins. This time, she sounded like she was in a trench, "Victor is hunting," she said. I spun my chair away from my desk, looking out at the city skyline. "What do you mean?" I asked. "He is asking around the old neighborhood," Laurel said. "He is trying to find anyone who knows where you are. He told Mrs. Gable that he wants to reconnect for the anniversary, but I know his finances. Taylor. I have a friend at the bank he uses. Victor is over-leveraged. He has 3 commercial loans coming due, and the interest rates just adjusted upward. He is drowning." I felt a cold calm wash over me. I knew what this was. "He needs collateral," I said. "He needs the trust," Laurel confirmed, "and he needs it now." 2 days later, the alert came. I had set up a digital monitoring system with the trust administrator, a quiet, terrifyingly efficient lawyer I had hired the day I turned 25. The system notified me of any access attempts. I was in a meeting with a client when my phone buzzed. I glanced down and saw the notification. Unauthorized access attempt. Source: Phoenix, Arizona. Method: mail-in request. I excused myself and walked into my private office. I called the administrator immediately. "Ms. Evans?" he said. "We received a request to transfer the royalty assignment. It included a notarized waiver claiming to be from you." "Send me a scan," I said, when the image popped up on my screen. I almost laughed. It was a document signed with a shaky, hesitant hand. The signature looked like mine did when I was 17. They had traced it. They had taken that old document I saw in Victor's office, the one they claimed was a draft, and they had tried to use it as a template to forge a current waiver. They were not just desperate, they were sloppy, and they were insulting my intelligence. "Block it," I told the administrator. "Flag it as fraud, but do not tell them I caught it. Just tell them the signature does not match the current exemplar on file." I hung up and sat in the silence of my office. My team was working quietly outside the glass walls, building careers, building a future, and 2 states away. My mother and stepfather were trying to rob a teenager who didn't exist anymore. I realized then that any invitation I received from them would not be an olive branch. It would be a subpoena in a wedding envelope. They didn't want Taylor. They wanted the signature. They wanted the girl who would sign anything just to be loved. I looked at the calendar. Their 20th anniversary was next week. I picked up my phone and called Evan. "I need you to help me find a box," I said. "What kind of box?" he asked. "Something beautiful," I said. "Something that looks like it holds a diamond, or a deed, or a promise." "What are you going to put in it?" I looked at the stack of legal compliance forms on my desk. I looked at the fraud alert on my screen. "A choice," I said. That evening, I brought the box to the studio. It was a deep navy blue, velvet-lined. I set it on my desk. It was empty. Evan walked in, dusting drywall dust off his jeans. He looked at the box, then at me. "You're going to go to the party," he stated. It wasn't a question. "I have to," I said. "If I don't go, they will keep trying to forge my name. They will keep hunting. I need to end it. I need to close the loop." I ran my hand over the velvet lid. "If they want a gift," I said, my voice low and steady, "they are going to earn it." I wasn't going to tell them I was successful. I wasn't going to tell them I had money. I was going to walk in there as the girl they remembered, the freeloader, the burden. I was going to give them exactly what they expected, and see if they had the decency to treat me like a human being. And if they didn't, well, I had the paperwork to bury them. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, wedged between a utility bill and a flyer for a pizza place. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock with gold foil lettering that caught the light in a way that was meant to impress, but only managed to look desperate. I carried it upstairs to the loft, the weight of it feeling less like paper and more like a court summons. I slid it open with a letter opener. The pleasure of your company is requested at the 20th anniversary celebration of Marissa and Victor Klein. The venue was the Sonoran Ridge Country Club. The date was next Saturday, but it was the handwritten note at the bottom, scrawled in blue ink, that I recognized instantly, that made my stomach turn. We should talk. Please come home. It was signed simply, Mom. There was no apology. There was no acknowledgement of the 7 years of silence. There was only a command dressed up as a request. We should talk is the universal code for I need something from you. I placed the invitation on the kitchen counter and picked up my phone. I needed to verify the landscape before I stepped onto the battlefield. I dialed Aunt Laurel. I got one too, Laurel said before I could even say hello. Her voice was tight. I was not invited to the wedding, but suddenly I am essential for the anniversary. That tells you everything. What is the actual situation? Laurel, I asked. I know they are fishing, but I need to know the bait. It is not just bait, Taylor. It is survival, Laurel replied. I made some calls. My friend at the bank says Victor is leveraging everything. He has a development deal in Scottsdale that is stalled because he cannot secure the final round of financing. His liquidity is dried up. The bank is asking for additional collateral or a guaranteed income stream to underwrite the bridge loan. The trust, I said. The puzzle pieces clicked together with the satisfying snap of a magnetic lock. Exactly, Laurel said. The royalties from your father's patent are not huge, but they are consistent, and consistency is exactly what a bank looks for when underwriting a high-risk loan. If Victor can get you to assign the rights to the trust over to the family estate, he can use that revenue stream to guarantee his loan. He saves his project, and he saves his reputation. I looked at the gold foil on the invitation. It all made sense. The email from the lawyer last week requiring my signature, the sudden desire to reconnect, the anniversary party. It was a three-pronged attack. They were trying to corner me socially, legally, and emotionally all at once. They think I am still the teenager who does not understand what a royalty assignment inquiry means, I said, the memory of that file in Victor's office flashing in my mind. They think they can hand me a glass of champagne, tell me they miss me, and slide a piece of paper in front of me that signs away my future. Be careful, Taylor, Laurel warned. Desperate men are dangerous. Victor is not just greedy anymore. He is cornered. That evening, Evan found me sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by legal pads. I had drawn out a timeline on a whiteboard I usually used for construction schedules. I was mapping out their strategy like it was a hostile takeover. Evan handed me a mug of tea and sat down on the sofa behind me. He read the invitation on the counter. "Are you going?" he asked. "I have to," I said. "If I ignore this, they will just escalate. They will forge another signature, or they will show up at my door. I need to end this on my terms." "Do you want me to come with you?" he asked. I turned to look at him. Evan was my safe harbor. Walking into that club with him would be easier. He would be a shield. But that was exactly why I could not bring him. "No," I said. "If I walk in there with a successful man in a suit, their narrative will be that I found someone new to take care of me. They will say I am still a dependent, just on a different payroll. They need to see that I am standing on my own 2 feet. If I am going to break the cycle, I have to do it alone." Evan nodded slowly. He understood. "So, what is the goal? Do you want closure, or do you want proof?" "Both," I said. "I want them to look me in the eye and tell me the truth. And if they cannot do that, I want to expose the lie so thoroughly that they can never try to use my name again." The next day, I made an appointment with my attorney. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man named David who specialized in estate law. I laid everything out for him. The trust deed, the email from the strange law firm, the history of the lost mail. "This is aggressive," David said, reviewing the email. "They are banking on you not knowing that the renewal rights belong solely to you upon turning 25. If you sign a general assignment waiver, you are effectively transferring ownership of the intellectual property to the Klein estate. You would be giving them the patent rights." "I am not going to sign it," I said, "but I need to be prepared for when they try to force me." We spent 2 hours drafting documents. I had David prepare a cease and desist order, a formal affidavit of identity theft regarding the previous access attempts, and a declaration of intent to renew the rights in my sole name. "You are walking into a trap," David told me as I gathered my papers. "I know," I said, "but I am bringing my own trap." I called Laurel back that afternoon to finalize our strategy. "I need you to be there," I told her. "But you cannot walk in with me. If they see us together, they will put their guard up. I need them to think I am vulnerable. I need them to think I am alone, and maybe a little desperate for their approval." "I will be there," Laurel promised. "I will stay in the members' lounge until you signal. I have a guest pass from an old friend. They won't know I am in the building. The signal will be when I open the box," I said. "The box?" "I am bringing a gift," I said. "A real gift. And a test." I spent the rest of the week preparing that test. I went to a high-end stationery store and bought 2 envelopes. They were thick, linen-textured, and identical. In the first envelope, envelope A, I placed a letter. It was a simple, legally binding agreement that I had drafted myself. It stated that I would consider a limited, one-time loan to the Klein family to assist with their liquidity issues, provided they acknowledged the debt in writing, publicly apologized for the estrangement, and agreed to never access the trust again. It was the path of reconciliation. It was the family-first option. In the second envelope, envelope B, I placed the documents David and I had prepared, the cease and desist, the proof of attempted fraud, the copy of my father's letter. It was the path of destruction. I placed both envelopes at the bottom of the navy blue velvet box. On top of them, I placed a single object, a silver key. It was the duplicate key to a condo I had purchased 2 weeks ago in Phoenix, a modest 2-bedroom unit near the university. I had bought it as an investment property, but for the purpose of this evening, it represented the one thing they had always held over my head: a home. I wrapped the box in navy paper and tied it with a silver ribbon. The bow was perfect. It looked innocent. It looked like a peace offering. But as I tied the knot, I knew that only one envelope would leave that party. The choice would not be mine. It would be theirs. I was giving them one final chance to be parents instead of predators. I looked at the box sitting on my desk. It was heavy with 13 years of silence. I was ready. I packed my bag, checked my flight to Phoenix, and took a deep breath. The detective work was done. The trial was about to begin. I stood in the center of the living room in my own home, staring at the deed on the table. It was a tangible piece of paper, representing a very specific reality I had constructed for this weekend. 3 days ago, I had closed on a property in Phoenix. It was not a sprawling estate like the one in Juniper Heights. It was a 2-bedroom condo in a solid, pre-war building about 20 minutes from where Marissa lived. It had good bones, new plumbing, and a view of a park. It was sensible. It was safe. It was exactly the kind of home my father would have approved of. I had bought it with my own money. Earnings from the studio. Not a cent from the trust. It was intended to be an investment property. But for tonight, it was a lifeline. If Marissa and Victor were truly drowning, if they were truly sorry, this condo was their life raft. It was paid off. They could live there rent-free. They could downsize with dignity. It was a fresh start. A way to leave the crushing debt of the country club lifestyle behind. But a life raft is useless if the person drowning is trying to pull you under with them. I turned to the navy blue box sitting on my desk. It was deep and lined with heavy cream velvet. I ran my finger along the edge of the lining. It was not glued down. I had carefully pried it loose earlier that morning to create a false bottom. This was the mechanism of my test. I picked up the first envelope. I called it Envelope A. It was thick, sealed with a clear wax stamp. Inside was a document that my lawyer, David, had called the Family Pact. It was legally binding, but its terms were emotional. It stated that I would transfer the title of the condo to them for a period of 10 years. I would cover the property taxes. In exchange, they had to agree to 3 things. 1, they would never ask me for money again. 2, they would never attempt to access the Sean Evans Trust or any intellectual property associated with it. And 3, we would attend family therapy once a month for a year. It was the path of grace. It was the door I was leaving open. Just a crack. Because the little girl inside me still desperately wanted a mother who protected her. I placed envelope A into the bottom of the box. Then I picked up envelope B. This one felt heavier, though it contained the same amount of paper. Inside this envelope was a different future. It contained a cease and desist order, effective immediately. It contained a forensic analysis of the forged signature from the attempted mail-in fraud. It contained a sworn affidavit from the trust administrator, blocking any transfer of rights. And it contained a copy of the police report I had drafted, but not yet filed, detailing the identity theft. Envelope B was not a handshake. It was a restraining order. It was the document that would humiliate them, expose them, and cut them off from my father's legacy forever. I placed envelope B right next to envelope A. They lay there side by side, two alternate realities, separated by a millimeter of paper. I pressed the velvet lining back down, smoothing it over so the bottom looked seamless. No one looking at the box would know that the foundation was rigged, on top of the velvet. I placed the deed to the condo. It was a transfer document, stamped and notarized, needing only their signatures to be valid, and on top of the deed, I placed the single silver key to the unit. It looked beautiful. It looked like a generous, extravagant gift from a successful daughter. It looked like salvation. I walked over to my purse and checked the side pocket. I touched the crisp edge of the folded paper inside. It was a copy of my father's letter, the one Aunt Laurel had given me in the diner 13 years ago. The original was safe in Laurel's safe deposit box, but I needed this copy close to my chest. If Victor tried to spin a story, if Marissa tried to paint me as the villain in front of their friends, I would not shout. I would not cry. I would simply read my father's words. I would let a dead man testify for me. Evan walked into the room. He was wearing a dark suit, looking handsome and sturdy, but his eyes were filled with worry. He had offered to drive me to the airport, but we both knew he could not come to the party. He leaned against the doorframe, watching me adjust the ribbon. "You packed both?" he asked. "I packed both," I confirmed. He walked over and looked at the box. He knew what was underneath the velvet. We had spent 2 nights debating the strategy. He thought I was being too generous with envelope A. He thought they did not deserve a condo. He thought they deserved a jail cell. But he respected that this was my exorcism, not his. "What do you hope happens?" Evan asked softly. I paused, my hands hovering over the silver ribbon. The air in the room was still. I looked out the window at the skyline of the city I had conquered, the life I had built from scratch. I was safe here. I was respected here. Going back to Arizona was walking back into the cage, even if I held the key. "I hope they choose me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I hope they look at me, and they see their daughter, not a bank account. I hope Victor realizes he cannot bully me, and I hope Marissa remembers that she used to love me before he came along. I hope they take the condo, sign the pact, and we can be distant, but civil. I hope they choose the relationship over the royalty check. And if they don't," Evan asked, "then they get envelope B," I said, my voice hardening into the tone I used when a contractor tried to lie about a load-bearing wall. "And they lose everything." Evan nodded. He reached out and squeezed my shoulder. "You are giving them a chance they would never give you. That makes you better than them, Taylor. No matter what happens tonight, I am not doing it to be better," I said. "I am doing it to be sure. I need to know that if I walk away forever, it was their choice, not mine. I need to know I offered the lifeboat before I let the ship sink." I looked down at the box one last time. The silver key glinted under the track lighting. It was such a small thing, a piece of metal cut with ridges and valleys. But tonight, it was a judge's gavel. I picked up the silver ribbon. It was satin, cool to the touch. I wound it around the box, crossing it underneath, bringing it up to the top. I tied the knot with the precision of a surgeon. I fluffed the bow until it was perfectly symmetrical, hiding the contents, hiding the trap. I whispered to the empty room, a final prayer to the universe, or maybe just a reminder to myself. They will decide which envelope they get, I said. Without even realizing it, I picked up the box. It felt heavy, loaded with 29 years of history. I turned to Evan. I am ready, I said. I walked out the door, the box in my hands, heading toward a party that was designed to be my ambush, armed with a gift that would be their judgment day. The Sonoran Ridge Country Club had not changed in 13 years. It still smelled of old money, furniture polish, and the desperate, cloying scent of social climbing. As I walked through the double doors, the air conditioning hit me first, followed immediately by the wave of whispers. I was wearing a simple, tailored black dress that cost more than my entire wardrobe combined when I was 16. But to the people in this room, I was still the girl in the thrift store jeans. I could hear them as I moved toward the center of the ballroom. The acoustics of the high ceilings carried their hushed tones perfectly. Is that her? The daughter who ran away. I heard she failed out of state college, probably here for a loan. I kept my face neutral. I did not scan the room for friendly faces because I knew there were none. My eyes were locked on the head table where my mother held court. Marissa looked up as I approached. She was holding a glass of champagne, her fingers wrapped tight around the stem. When our eyes met, there was no spark of maternal recognition. There was no relief. There was only a curt, stiff nod, the kind one gives to a distant acquaintance or a tax auditor. She did not stand up. She did not open her arms. She stayed seated, ensuring that everyone in the room understood the hierarchy. I was the petitioner. She was the queen. I had barely taken 3 steps into the room when a shadow fell over me. Well, look who finally crawled back. Bryce stood in my path, swirling a tumbler of scotch. He had aged, but not well. His face was puffy, the softness of a man who had never been told no. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my shoes, looking for scuffs, looking for weakness. "Hello, Bryce," I said, my voice level. He leaned in close, invading my personal space. He smelled of expensive alcohol and nervous sweat. "So," he sneered, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, "are you here to apologize? Or are you here to beg? Because if it is the latter, the line forms at the back." "I am just here for the anniversary," I said, sidestepping him. He moved to block me again. His hand shot out, grabbing my upper arm. It was not painful, but it was possessive. He jerked his head toward a deli-lit corner of the room, where a man in a gray suit sat alone with a briefcase on his knees. I recognized the type instantly. Corporate counsel. Not a guest. A shark. "We have a family friend over there," Bryce said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. "Mr. Henderson. He has some paperwork that needs tidying up. Just a few signatures for the family estate. You sign. We cut you a check for your trouble, and you can leave before you embarrass yourself. Easy. So, that was the play. Ambush by appetizer. They wanted to corner me before I even reached the main table, get the rights to the trust signed away while I was disoriented, and shove me out the back door. I looked at Bryce's hand on my arm. Then I looked at his eyes. I do not sign anything at parties. Bryce, I said. My voice was not loud, but it was projected. It carried the sharp, metallic ring of authority I used when shutting down a non-compliant contractor. Bryce blinked. He let go of my arm, as if he had touched a hot stove. He was expecting the mousy teenager who cried when he stole her diary. He was not expecting a woman who stared back with the cold precision of an auditor. I suggest you sit down, I added. You look flushed. I walked past him, leaving him standing there with his mouth slightly open. I made my way to the head table. The conversation in the room had died down to a low murmur. All eyes were on me. I could feel the weight of their judgment. Heavy and suffocating. Marissa was smiling now, but it was a performance. She gestured to the empty chair at the far end of the table, as far away from her and Victor as possible. Everyone, Marissa announced, her voice pitching up into that airy, fake register she used when she was lying. You remember Taylor? It is such a surprise to see her. We honestly did not think she would make it. You know how she is. She leaned toward the woman next to her, a wealthy neighbor I vaguely recognized, and lowered her voice just enough to make sure everyone leaned in to listen. She had such a hard time launching, Marissa said, shaking her head with theatrical sadness. She dropped out of everything we tried to get her into, disappeared for years. She just refuses to listen to reason. It has been very hard on Victor and me, supporting a child who just won't take hold. The guests nodded sympathetically. The narrative was set. I was the failure. They were the saints. Victor stood up then. He tapped his spoon against his glass. The sound rang out, sharp and commanding. He adjusted his tie, puffing out his chest. He looked at me, his eyes cold and hard, stripping me of any success I had built over the last decade. To him, I was just an asset he hadn't liquidated yet. To 20 years, Victor boomed. 20 years of building this family, building this legacy. He raised his glass, and his gaze locked onto mine. It hasn't always been easy. We have had to carry more than our fair share of weight. Some people... He paused for effect, tilting his glass toward me. Some people do not understand the value of hard work. They think the world owes them something. They just take. But in this family, we give. Here, here, someone shouted from the back. The room applauded. They were applauding my humiliation. They were cheering for the man who had tried to steal my father's legacy to pay for his country club membership. I did not clap. I waited until the applause died down. The room went silent, waiting for my reaction. They wanted tears. They wanted a scene. They wanted the rebellious daughter to storm out so they could gossip about it for the next year. I stood up. I picked up the navy blue velvet box from where I had rested it on my chair. I walked slowly, deliberately, to the center of the head table. I stopped directly in front of Marissa. I placed the box on the pristine white tablecloth. It landed with a solid, heavy thud. "Happy anniversary, Mom," I said. Marissa looked at the box. She saw the silver ribbon. She saw the quality of the velvet. For a split second, I saw greed flicker in her eyes. She thought it was jewelry. She thought I had come to buy her love. But then she looked at my face, and she saw nothing but ice. The greed turned to suspicion. She recoiled slightly, as if the box were ticking. "What is this?" she asked sharply. "A choice," I said. Victor stepped forward. He did not look at the box. He looked at the crowd, sensing that he was losing control of the moment. He needed to reassert dominance. He needed to crush me before I could speak. "We do not need your charity, Taylor." Victor spat, his voice booming without the microphone. "We know you do not have 2 nickels to rub together. I am not going to let you sit here and pretend you are one of us." He reached out and shoved the box back toward me. It slid across the table, knocking over a salt shaker. "We don't fund freeloaders," Marissa added, her voice shrill. Finally dropping the mask of the polite hostess, she pointed a manicured finger at my chest. "You come in here, after all these years, with a wrapped box and think you can just sit at my table. You are a drain. Taylor, you always have been." The word freeloader hung in the air. The silence in the room was absolute. 60 guests held their breath. This was the execution. I was supposed to run now. I did not run. I smiled. It was the smile of a person who holds 4 aces. "Before I leave," I said, my voice calm, projecting to the back of the room without shouting, "Can I ask one question?" Victor's face turned purple. "Get out!" I ignored him. I looked straight at Marissa. "Why does a document with my signature exist from the year I was 17? The question hit the room like a physical shockwave. A woman at the next table dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against her china plate. The lawyer in the corner suddenly closed his briefcase. Marissa froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The color drained from her face, leaving her rouge standing out like clown paint. She knew exactly what document I was talking about. "I don't know what you are talking about," she stammered, looking frantically at Victor. "You do," I said. "And so does Victor. And so does the notary you paid off." Victor lunged forward, grabbing the box. "Take your trash and get out of my sight." I placed my hand over his. Stopping him, my grip was iron. I looked him in the eye, and for the first time he flinched. He saw the strength in my hand. He saw the auditor, not the stepdaughter. "You called me a freeloader in front of everyone," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, low register. "You wanted an audience. Victor, You wanted to make this public. I reached for the end of the silver ribbon. I hooked my finger through the loop. So, since you made the accusation public, I said, pulling the ribbon tight, ready to release the knot. Let's make the truth public, too. I paused, my hand resting on the lid of the box. The tension in the room was a physical weight, a rubber band pulled to its breaking point. No one moved. No one breathed. They were waiting to see what kind of bomb was hidden under the velvet. I looked at Marissa one last time. Do you want to open it? I asked softly. Or shall I? I pulled the silver ribbon loose. The knot gave way with a soft, silky whisper that sounded impossibly loud in the silent room. I lifted the lid of the navy blue box and tilted it forward so the light from the chandeliers hit the contents. A collective gasp swept through the room. Resting on the plush cream velvet was a single silver key, gleaming like a weapon. Underneath it sat a thick stack of documents. The top one clearly stamped with the seal of a property deed. This is a home, I said, my voice steady. It is a 2-bedroom condo in Phoenix. It is fully renovated. It is accessible. And most importantly, it is paid off. 0 mortgage, 0 debt. I bought it because I wanted to give you a reset. I wanted to believe that if the pressure of money was gone, you might finally be the parents I needed. Marissa stared at the key. The hostility in her eyes vanished, replaced instantly by a hunger so raw it was difficult to watch. She saw her salvation. She saw a way out of the financial hole she and Victor had dug. Oh, Taylor, Marissa breathed, her voice trembling with a sudden, performative affection. She reached out, her manicured fingers stretching toward the box. I knew you were a good girl. I knew you cared about family. She was inches away from the key when I slammed the lid down halfway, trapping her hand's path. She jerked back as if I had bitten her. Not so fast, I said. I reached under the velvet lining and pulled out the 2 envelopes. I held them up, one in each hand. They were identical on the outside, but they held 2 very different fates. Envelope A or envelope B, I announced, looking from Victor to Marissa. Same ribbon, different future. Victor stepped in then. He had recovered his composure, shifting into salesman mode. He walked around the table, trying to herd me away from the microphone, trying to block the guest's view. Now, Taylor, he said, his voice dropping to that patronizing purr he used on clients. Let's not do this here. Let's go to the manager's office. We can sit down, have a drink, and look at the paperwork properly. We can work this out like adults. I took a step back, putting distance between us. No, I said. You had 13 years to take me to a private room and explain why you stole from me. You had 13 years to call me. You chose silence. You chose to erase me. So now, we finish this where you started it, in public. Please, Marissa whimpered, realizing the tide had turned. The guests were not laughing anymore. They were watching with the rapt attention of a jury. Taylor, do not ruin this night. We are your parents. Are you? A voice rang out from the back of the room. It was not mine. The crowd parted as a woman walked forward. She wore a simple gray suit, and she walked with a cane, but her spine was steel. It was Aunt Laurel. A ripple of recognition went through the older members of the club. They remembered her. They remembered Sean. "Laurel?" Victor hissed, his face draining of color. "What are you doing here?" "I am here to witness the transaction," Laurel said, coming to stand beside me. She did not look at them with anger. She looked at them with pity. "I am here because Sean cannot be—" I looked at my mother and stepfather. Even now, with the truth staring them in the face, they were calculating. Victor was eyeing the deed. Marissa was eyeing the crowd, wondering how to spin this. They did not care about the 13 years of pain. They only cared about the asset on the table. They had failed the test. "I gave you a choice," I said. "I brought a home because I hoped you would choose your daughter over your pride. But you didn't. You called me a freeloader. You tried to bully me into signing away my rights before I even sat down. I dropped envelope A onto the floor. It landed near Victor's shoes. I am choosing envelope B," I said. I turned to Laurel. I picked up the silver key from the box. "This condo was bought for family," I said, my voice cracking slightly for the first time. "For the person who kept every promise. For the person who never asked me for a dime." I pressed the key into Laurel's hand. "It is yours, Aunt Laurel," I said. "It is in your name. I signed the transfer this morning." The room went absolutely silent. Marissa let out a strangled sound, half gasp, half sob. "You cannot do that. That is our gift." "It was never yours," I said. "You have to earn a gift." I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded copy of my father's letter. I opened it. "Sean Evans wrote this the week before he died," I said, addressing the room. He wrote, "I do not know what your mother will do when I am gone, but I know she gets scared, and when she gets scared, she thinks about money. Do not let her drown you with her." Marissa covered her mouth with her hand. She looked like she was going to be sick. I picked up the last envelope, envelope B, and slapped it down on the table in front of Victor. "Inside this envelope is not a check," I said, my voice hard. "It is a cease and desist order. It is a forensic analysis of the signature you forged on the royalty waiver last week, and it is a formal notice that I have renewed the patent rights in my sole name. You will never see a penny from the Sean Evans Trust. Not today. Not ever." Victor stared at the envelope. He looked old. He looked defeated. The shark had lost his teeth. "I am not punishing you," I said, looking them both in the eye. "I am protecting myself." I turned my back on them. I felt a hand take mine. It was Evan. He had walked in quietly with Laurel, standing in the shadows until I was done fighting my own battle. He squeezed my hand, and I let out a breath I had been holding for a decade. We walked out of the ballroom together, Laurel on one side, Evan on the other, behind us. There was no applause. There was no laughter. There was only the sound of a legacy crumbling and the silence of a truth that could no longer be buried. The box was open. The secret was out, and I was finally, truly free. "Thank you," so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from. So please drop your location in the comments below so we can connect. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Morgan Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.